So you can see it clearly. There you go. Kenya's foreign policy and diplomacy, evolution, challenges, and opportunity. And we know Kenya matters regionally and globally. It is the economic powerhouse of East Africa and a long-standing hub for multilateral diplomacy. Its position in a turbulent region has fashioned its profile as an anchor state in Africa, peace and security. Until recently, Kenya's foreign policy orientation has situated it as a benign regional leader, but pressing developments in the region and international environments have edged it towards a more assertive foreign policy position. And of course, this book that we've just shown you constitutes a multi-level review of Kenya's foreign policy, and it hacks back into history from 1963, beginning with Jomo Kenyatta through to the current President Uhuru Kenyatta, and also evaluating context pertinent to the analysis of Kenya's foreign policy, the fundamental principles, objectives, and pillars of the current foreign policy, also unpacked in this book that we are showing you this morning. We want to continue with the conversation. Allow me to introduce our panelists if you just joined us this morning. And very pivotal right now also is a question of Somali and the maritime dispute that we're still on. Yesterday in the Daily Nation, we had this particular story also that we need to tease out to the panelists. And how does it also sit with the foreign policy? Somalia jumps the gun on oil wells. There is a controversy there. The maritime border dispute between Kenya and Somalia could get murkier as details emerge that Somalia plans to auction oil blocks within the contested sea territory even before the court delivers judgment on the matter in September. Right? Since we are talking diplomacy here, what does it portend for the country? And we know also today is a big day for Kenya as far as seeking that non-member state non-member state seat at the UN Security Council. So allow me to introduce our panelists today. We have with us, this is Dr. Hassan Hanenje, who is the director at the Horn Institute. And we have also with us Irungu Houghton, who is the Executive Director, Amnesty International Kenya. We have Ambassador Boaz Mbaya, who's the founder and Executive Director, Center for Policy Analysis, and also the author of Kenya's Foreign Policy and Diplomacy. We have as well Dr. Mustafa Yusuf Ali, who is a peace and conflict resolution expert. We continue with the conversation of pace. Ahmed Hashi, also a governors and policy experts. We continue with the conversation. Hit us on Twitter. AM11TV is a Twitter handle. AM11TV, our profile name on Facebook, and 20686, our SMS portal. Right, so last week we left at looking at different, if maybe just we can remind our viewers where we were at as far as the book is concerned. And my director may just pick up on this. Last week we left at looking at the first regime and how the foreign policy was configured as well. And this is Jomo Kenyatta. And we talked about how he approached, or his approach to the foreign policy was the non-allied diplomacy or non-allied agreements. And maybe you can bring us to speed. We begin there. We can also try and look at the Moi's regime and the philosophy of Moi. We had with the Kenyatta, it was Harambe. Moi was Nyayo philosophy. Going to Mwai Kibaki, it was a working nation. And we're still struggling to get also Uhuru's philosophy as far as moving forward is concerned with the diplomacy as well. But Dr. Ambassador Mbai, we can actually bring us to speed just briefly, a recap of last week, where we were at and where we're headed today. Also trying to get that conversation, juxtaposing it with what is happening today in Somalia as the maritime dispute is concerned, and also we seeking a seat at the UN Security Council.
Thank you very much. I think we need to look at what Prime Minister and then later President Jomo Kenyatta did in foreign policy. One, he set the tempo for non-aligned foreign policy for Kenya.
Yes.
But at the same time, he also faced very serious territorial challenges to the country, beginning with the shifter insurrection in what was North Frontier District. Now the present Wajir, Garissa, and counties, and the border issues have remained unresolved since that time, because one, there is not much willingness by the states themselves to comply with the 1964 legal instruments adopted by the OAU then. We need to look at how the policy has evolved from that time. As I indicated last week, Kenya joined the international community as a revolutionary state, but quickly compromised itself and looked at market conditions, which established the sort of economic status we have, Kenya enjoys today in this sub-region. So a host of things need to be looked at. The Somali issue is important because in 1960, when Somalia became independent, they declared that they were going to pursue a greater Somali policy. And in my opinion, it doesn't seem to have been changed at all. I don't think they have renounced it. And even the maritime problem we're facing with them could be seen in that light. And Kenya needs to act very decisively to protect its own interests in the Indian Ocean. We also need to act decisively to ensure that the territorial boundaries are clearly marked and there is no more threat to our territorial integrity. Yes.
Right. Let's hear from Ahmed Hashi.
Dubal, I think it's in the national security interest of Kenya for there to be a united, strong, non-divided Somali republic that produces oil, prosperous. Kenyan youth can go to Somalia and get jobs. Our future is not in a sovereign state called Kenya. It's not in a sovereign state called Uganda, Tanzania. We're East Africans, and we need to think in this way. I've said before in the last debate here that the very idea of a nation state with its strapping of territorial integrity, a flag, a system of government is not going to be the future that produces jobs for 80% of our youth that are unemployed. It's not going to bring prosperity to this region. A common market that is based on free trade, one currency, and it is in fact what President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni and Kagame and all the heads of state are going to go to Arusha, I believe, in the coming week, to go and discuss the political integration of this region. We're 50 years behind that because we should have done this when we got independence in 1960. We had the East African Community and the exact same foreign policy of President Kenyatta and Julius Kabarage Nyerere produced this huge division, because remember, Mr. Ambassador, that the two countries of Uganda and Tanzania were socialist bent. Apollo Milton Obote and Julius Nyerere were following the Eastern Bloc. And President Kenyatta was firmly in the Western Bloc. So I've always said, with all the good intentions we have in our region, with all the good intentions we have in the debate between Jaramogi and Jomo Kenyatta, the ideological power of the Cold War divided us and divided this East African region. It divided our foreign policy. It was pragmatic maybe to go with the West. It was pragmatic maybe to go with the Soviet Union. But today in 2019, pragmatism is not going to help us. We have to look inside ourselves and say, look, China has lifted 300 million people off poverty. India is becoming a world power, even though it's not being responsible in Kashmir. Yes. So we have to be able to understand that East Africa is a home, common market. If you go to the streets today, you'll find young Burundian boys selling on Ngong Road. If you go to Burundi, you'll find Somali tradesmen in the city selling. If you go to Kampala, you'll find people from Central Province taking their vegetables and tomatoes there. The people are voting with their feet. Let the governments follow them.
All right. Let's hear from Irungu Houghton as well. I think you've had also had the opportunity to go through the book as well to continue with the conversation. What have you picked out so far?
So first, I just want to congratulate Ambassador Mbaya for this initiative. I read the book between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock this morning, true story. All 268 pages, I think it is, or 248 pages. 248 pages. There were 39 references to corruption and 39 references to human rights. And as you probably know, as Amnesty, that's the first place I would go. So maybe just a few remarks. First of all, with a light touch, I mean, one of the things that I was hoping not to confirm in the book, is the jokes about diplomats. And there are a number, I mean, and I'm sure Ambassador Baya knows them very well. One of them is that ambassadors need to know lots of languages, including doublespeak and alternative facts.
Yes.
Or diplomats are the kind of people that when they're chased out of a country, they look like they're leading a parade. So smoke and mirrors, public relations, spinning is very much part of diplomatic work. But I think, what I found very refreshingly in the book is not that. I found an academic, scholarly piece of work that actually gives us a very large reference for foreign policy across the decades that he's looking at. Couple of points. I think I was left kind of interested about, let me come to the human rights question. Human rights is very much central to all the developments in our region. So if you look at, for example, Tanzania invading Uganda to get rid of Idi Amin, or whether it is the self-determination of South Sudan, or whether more recently the uprisings and the Blue Revolution in Sudan, these are all about human rights issues, including our own status as a pariah state under President Moi because of the human rights violations that were there. So human rights has been always very critical in terms of foreign policy issues. I think the thing that I thought was a bit interesting was you dealt with the issue of isolationism in terms of the United States, but I actually wondered, gently, whether we could also be accused as a country of having a fairly isolationist approach. And it comes back to the point that was being made earlier. So to give you an example, we seem to be friends of everyone. And enemies of none, or there's no robust challenging that we're doing either, for example, with regards to the destruction of the two-state approach by the US to Palestine. We don't challenge the Chinese on their human rights records, both domestically and within their region. It seems to be that we have our own interests first, and disinterest for what's happening out there. Now, this is a bit of a sweeping statement, but I think it's worth looking at whether or not we are internationalist enough in our foreign policy currently. And I'd love to hear your view on that. And then the other one really is, as always, I'm always looking for the stories that can't be told. I know you've not put them in the book, and therefore you've probably escaped the wrath of some of your colleagues in the sector. But I think what would be interesting for me would be, as a seasoned diplomat, what were the missed opportunities were there? I mean, I remember during 2008 finding the home of the Mozambican ambassador, who was then the African dean of the diplomatic corps. And the country was raging, there was violence all over, we were heading towards the 1,000 person deaths mark in terms of the post-election violence. And I went and looked for the ambassador. And I said to him, why is the African Union and the African Diplomatic Corps so silent in Nairobi? Right? We have an AU position that is very clear. And he looked me in the eye and he said, listen, sir, you may not understand diplomacy, but let me brief you. If I was to speak publicly at this point, I would be on a first-class ticket back to Maputo, and that would probably be the end of my posting. And I remember referring this back to Ambassador Kiplagat and saying, why is it that African diplomats are, as they say, the first to think about all the issues and the last to say anything?
Good question.